The cold came off the Ohio River that morning like it had a grudge, and Yvette Calloway walked into it in a canvas coat that had been rained on in 4 countries. She had slept 2 hours on a cargo plane. She smelled like antiseptic and jet fuel, and the inside of a duffel bag. Her braids were pushed up under a knit cap that had lost its shape somewhere over the Atlantic, and the only thing on her that looked like it cost real money was a small enamel pin on her lapel, a red heart with 2 hands cupped under it, and nobody ever looked at the pin. They looked at the coat. They looked at the boots with the split seam. They looked at a black woman standing outside the glass doors of the Calloway Cardiac Institute at 6:10 in the morning, and Wade Rutherford, head of security, decided in under 3 seconds that she was a problem. "Ma'am," he said the word the way some men say it, so that it lands closer to a slur. "This is a private medical facility. Warming center's 4 blocks down on Poplar. I'm coming in to work," Yvette said. She said it plainly. No edge, no fight. 50 minutes from now, Wade Rutherford would be down on both knees on the polished floor of the 3rd-floor surgical corridor, gripping the leg of Yvette's scrubs, begging her not to let his son die. He didn't know that yet. He didn't know her name yet. He looked at the coat, and he thought he knew everything he needed to. "Sure you are," he said. "Let's go. Off the property." Here is what mattered about Yvette Calloway, and what none of them could see. 26 years earlier she had learned to be still. A first-year resident, exhausted, had thrown a metal tray at her in front of an attending and told her the affirmative action girls always washed out by spring. She had not flinched then, and she did not flinch now. Stillness had become a thing she built the way other people build muscle. She stood in the cold with her hands loose at her sides, and she watched Wade Rutherford the way she watched a monitor that was starting to trend the wrong way, patient, gathering data, waiting to see how bad it was going to get before she moved. It was going to get bad. Behind Wade, a younger guard hung back near the door. Cole Bennett was 23, 6 weeks into the job, still ironing his uniform shirt every night because his mother had told him to. Cole looked at the woman in the coat, and something in him went uneasy. She wasn't acting like the people they usually moved along. Those people argued or begged or drifted off talking to nobody. This woman stood there like she owned the sidewalk, like she was deciding something about all of them. "Wade," Cole said. "Maybe we just—" "I got it," Wade said. There was a man to steps with a phone. His name was Trent Bellamy, and he was 34 years old, and he was in Cincinnati for exactly one reason. His firm was 3 weeks from closing on a distressed asset acquisition, a struggling 3-hospital network, and the Calloway Institute was the crown jewel they wanted to strip and rebrand. Trent had come early to walk the property and shoot content for the 200,000 people who followed him for what he called real talk about the healthcare grift. He had his phone up before Wade even touched the woman. "Okay, so this is what I'm talking about," Trent said into the lens, low and confidential. "The voice men use when they think they're letting you in on something. 6 a.m. I'm standing outside this so-called flagship hospital, and look, just look. They can't even keep the vagrants off the front steps. This is the operation they want a premium valuation on. Watch this." His counter said 1,100, then it said 1,600, then 2,200, the number climbing like a temperature. "You need to walk away from the door now," Wade told Yvette. "My badge is in my bag," Yvette said. "I'm going to reach for it." "Course it is." Wade did not wait for her to reach. He took her tote bag off her shoulder in one motion, the strap dragging her knit cap half off, and he turned it over and shook it out onto the wet concrete. A phone, a passport gone soft at the corners, a pack of gum, a laminated ID badge on a frayed lanyard that skidded across the step and stopped face up, and on it, if anyone had bent down to read it, was a photograph of a younger woman and the words Calloway Cardiac Institute, and under that, Chief of Surgery. Nobody bent down to read it. "That's a fake," Wade said, glancing at it for less than a second. "You people make these in the back of the bodega. That is my hospital's identification," Yvette said. "Still no heat. The name on the building is my name." Trent Bellamy laughed out loud behind his phone. "Oh, she's the owner. She's the owner, folks. She built the hospital. Between the bottle returns, I assume." 12,000 people were watching him now. A little heart-storm of reactions floated up the side of his screen. Down the street, a woman walking her 2 kids to the bus stop slowed, saw the guards and the woman on the ground gathering her things, pulled her children closer, and crossed to the other side. A man in a delivery vest muttered, "That ain't right," and did not stop. A nursing student on her way to a shift lifted her own phone, filmed 9 seconds, and kept walking because she was already late and because the world had taught her that this was somebody else's to fix. Nobody's was. Wade got a hand under Yvette's arm, not to help her up, to move her. And here is where a different woman might have finally broken and screamed her own name at them until it lost all its meaning. But Yvette Calloway had spent her whole life learning that a name screamed is a name they get to ignore. So she let him haul her upright, and she kept her voice level, and she said only, "Officer, you are making a mistake that is going to be very difficult to undo. I am telling you this to help you." "I'm helping you," Wade said, and he steered her down the steps, away from the doors, out toward the drop-off circle where the ambulances came. "There, now stay off the property." He had no idea, as he said it, that the property was about to save his entire life and end the one he'd known, because 3 miles away, on the Norwood side, a 9-year-old boy named Micah had woken up before his alarm and put on his own shoes because his dad worked early and his dad worked hard, and Micah liked to have his shoes on before the babysitter came. Micah had a heart he'd been born with wrong, a thing the doctors named in Latin, a narrow twist in the great vessel above the heart that had been patched once when he was 2. His father had spent 9 years watching him like a hawk over a field, and this morning, tying his own shoes, Micah Rutherford had stood up too fast, and the old patch had chosen that exact ordinary Tuesday to fail. The babysitter found him on the floor. She did what the fridge magnet said, and she called 911, and she called the dad, and Wade Rutherford's phone was in his locker on silent because he was outside dragging a woman away from a door. The ambulance did not take Micah to the county trauma center. It took him to the nearest place with a pediatric cardiac program, which was the Calloway Institute, which was the building his own father guarded and which had exactly one surgeon in the tri-state area with the hands for the thing that was tearing loose inside that little boy's chest. Inside, on the 3rd floor, Dr. Harlan Pierce was scrubbing when the trauma page hit, and he took one look at the echo on the portable screen and felt the floor tilt under him. He was a good surgeon. He knew the difference between a good surgeon and the person you needed for this, and he was not that person, and he knew exactly who was. "Where is Calloway?" he said to the room. "She's supposed to have landed last night. Somebody get me Calloway, now." Ruth Delacroix, charge nurse, 31 years on this floor, was already dialing. Ruth had trained under Yvette when Yvette was a resident who still ate standing up at the med station. Ruth had seen this hospital when it was a wing, then a floor, then a name carved in limestone. She called Yvette's cell and it rang and rang because the cell was on the wet concrete of the drop-off circle where it had landed when Wade emptied the bag. "She's not answering," Ruth said. "That's not like her." "Then find her," Pierce said. "This kid has maybe 40 minutes and I am telling you, Ruth, I open him up without her, I'm going to lose him." Out in the circle, Yvette had gathered her passport and her gum and her soft old phone, and she was reaching for the lanyard when Wade put his boot on it. Not hard. Just enough. A man reminding a woman whose ground she was standing on. "Leave it," he said. "It's a fake anyway." And Yvette looked up at him, and for the first time something moved across her face. Not anger, something older and sadder than anger. And she said, "You have children, don't you?" Wade blinked. "Excuse me? You've got a picture in your wallet. I can see the shape of it wearing through your back pocket from here. You're a father." She stood, slowly, leaving the badge under his boot because she'd decided it wasn't worth the dignity it would cost to grovel for it. "I hope somebody's kind to your kids on a morning when they look like they don't belong somewhere. I hope somebody looks twice." It hit him strangely. He didn't know why. He'd hear those words again in 50 minutes and they would nearly kill him. That was the moment Cole Bennett, the young one, finally stepped off the curb. Cole had picked the lanyard out from under Wade's boot, and he was turning it over. And he was reading it, actually reading it, the way nobody had, and his face was doing something complicated. "Wade," Cole said. His voice had gone thin. "Wade, this photo. It's her. It's younger, but it's her. And the name, Cole. The name on the badge is the name on the building." Cole held it up. His hand was shaking. "Wade, Wade. The name on the badge is the name on the building." Trent Bellamy's phone was at 29,000 viewers and climbing, and he had heard every word. And the professional part of his brain, the part that priced distressed assets for a living, went very cold and very quiet because he had just watched two security guards employed by the target company physically assault a woman whose ID said Chief of Surgery, and he had streamed all of it, live, with his own smug narration laid over the top, to 29,000 people and counting. The doors of the Institute burst open. Ruth Delacroix came through them at a dead run in her scrubs, 31 years, and she had not run in a decade. And she came down the steps calling a name, and the name she was calling was the name on the building. "Dr. Calloway! Dr. Calloway!" Yvette turned toward the doors, and everything in her posture changed. Not the humiliation of it. The relief drained out of Ruth's face, and something worse rushed in to replace it, because Ruth had seen the coat and the wet concrete, and the two guards standing over her mentor, like she was refused, and Ruth stopped at the bottom of the steps, and she did a thing she had done 10,000 times inside a building, and never once outside of one. Years ago, when the Institute was new and the staff were terrified of the woman whose name was on the door, Yvette had made a small joke that had turned, the way jokes do, into a tradition. When the chief entered an operating theater, the senior nurse would call out, "Surgeon on the floor," and it had started as a wink at the military, at Yvette's own father, who had been a master sergeant, and it had become the thing that told a frightened resident that the person who could not lose was now in the room. Every nurse on that floor knew it. Ruth had called it out over 1,000 patients. She called it out now, on the front steps of the hospital, into the cold, in a voice that carried across the drop-off circle, and the sidewalk, and the 30 phones and the live streams still uploading from a device 12 feet away. "Surgeon on the floor." Ruth's voice cracked and held. "Dr. Yvette Calloway, Chief of Surgery, founder of this institute." And then, because she was a nurse and not a herald, she added the only thing that mattered. "Ma'am, we have a child dying upstairs and you are the only one who can do it. Please. Right now." The circle stopped breathing. Trent Bellamy's phone slipped out of his hand. It hit the concrete lens up and kept transmitting to 40,000 strangers, all of whom heard the words Chief of Surgery and founder and dying child arrive together. On top 40,000 strangers who had just watched this man call the founder of a hospital a vagrant for content. Wade Rutherford's heart did not stop. It only felt to him like the whole world had. What stopped was his understanding of the last 10 minutes, all of it collapsing at once. The badge, the boot, the shaken-out bag, the boots with the split seam, the coat rained on in 4 countries, the calm voice telling him he was making a mistake he could not undo. He heard the words dying child, and something in his chest went cold and fell a long way. He did not know yet. He truly did not know yet. "What child?" he heard himself say. "What child?" Nobody answered him because nobody knew he was asking about the only one that would ever matter to him. Yvette Calloway did not look at Wade. She did not look at the phone or the crowd or the young guard holding her badge like it might bite him. She looked at Ruth, and 31 years passed between them in half a second, and Yvette said one word, "Move." And then the woman in the rained-on coat was gone, up the steps, through the doors, and the coat came off her shoulders as she went and hit the floor of the lobby, and underneath she was already reaching for the scrubs a nurse was holding out, because Ruth had radioed ahead, and she was already asking for the echo, the labs, the last pressures, in a voice that had turned into something none of the bystanders would have recognized as belonging to the woman on the sidewalk. It was low and fast and absolutely without fear. It was the voice of the person who could not lose. 9-year-old male, Pierce said, meeting her at the scrub sink, talking fast. "Prior coarctation repair, patch failure. He's got a contained rupture. Pressures are falling. I've got him on the table, but Yvette, I can't." "You did right to wait for me," she said, and scrubbed. "What's his name?" Pierce looked at the chart. Rutherford. Micah Rutherford. And Yvette Calloway, who had learned to be still, went still in a way that was different from all the other times, because she had just 10 minutes ago, on the sidewalk, told a security guard named Rutherford that she hoped someone would be kind to his children on a morning when they looked like they didn't belong. She had said it to wound him a little, the only unkind thing she'd allowed herself all morning, and now the universe had handed her his son's beating, breaking heart. She could have said 100 things. She said none of them. She scrubbed to the elbow, and she walked into the theater, and she looked at the small chest open under the lights, and every private thing in her, the humiliation and the cold and the boot on the badge, She sat down outside the door the way you set down a coat, and she picked up the one thing she had carried her whole life that no one could take off her shoulder in a drop-off circle. "All right, baby," she said quietly to a boy who couldn't hear her. "Let's get you home." Out in the third-floor corridor, they had let Wade up. A supervisor had pieced it together and had radioed him, and he had come up, and now he understood everything at once. All of it, the woman and the badge and the child. And he was on his knees on the polished floor outside the theater glass, because his legs had done exactly what he'd never believed legs could do. He watched through the glass. He couldn't see much. He could see her back, the woman he'd dragged off the steps, bent over his son, her hands moving in a way that looked less like surgery and more like prayer done with instruments. Cole Bennett stood beside him, still holding the badge, and Cole was crying without any sound, the badge in both hands like something he'd been asked to carry to a funeral. The surgery took 5 hours and 40 minutes. Yvette Calloway did not come out. She rebuilt the failed patch with a technique she had developed herself, that she'd taught in 6 countries, that had her name in the journals if you knew where to look. And twice the boy's pressures dropped to a place where a lesser surgeon would have called it, and both times she brought him back with the flat, unhurried certainty of a woman who had decided, on a wet sidewalk that morning, that she was not going to let this be the day the world's cruelty won something it wanted. At 12:20 in the afternoon, she walked out of the theater in bloodied scrubs, and she found Wade Rutherford still on the floor of the corridor where he'd been for almost 6 hours, because he had not been able to make himself leave and no one had made him. He got up when he saw her face. He tried to read it and he couldn't, because she'd gone still again. "Mr. Rutherford," she said. He couldn't speak. "Your son is alive." She let that land before anything else, because whatever he had done to her that morning, she had held a father in front of her, and she would not make a father wait for that sentence. The repair held. "He's going to the pediatric ICU. The next 72 hours matter, but he is strong, and if he wanted to put his own shoes on this morning, he's got some fight in him. You can see him in an hour." Wade Rutherford made a sound that wasn't a word. He said when he could, "I didn't, ma'am. I didn't know. If I'd known who you were," and this is the part the whole city would talk about later, because there were 4 staff members in that corridor, and every one of them heard it, and one of them wrote it down. "Stop," Yvette said. "Not cruel, just tired and clear. Don't finish that. I've heard men finish that sentence my whole life, and I need you to hear why it's the wrong one." She pulled the cap off her head and her braids came loose, and she looked for a second, exactly like the woman on the sidewalk again, and that was the point. "You keep saying if you'd known who I was, but you shouldn't have needed to know who I was. I could have been the vagrant you thought I was. I could have been a woman with nowhere to sleep who wandered up to a warm door on a cold morning, and she would have deserved the exact same thing from you that I did, not because of who she'd turn out to be, because of who she already was, standing right in front of you, before you knew a single thing about her." She put the cap in her pocket. "The whole trick, Mr. Rutherford, is being decent to people when you're sure they don't matter. That's the only time it counts." He nodded. He couldn't do anything else. "Go wash your face," she said, gentler now. "Your boy shouldn't wake up to a father who's been crying in a hallway. He should wake up to a father who looks like he never doubted it for a second. Can you do that for him?" Wade Rutherford went and washed his face. The rest of it came apart fast, the way these things do now. Trent Bellamy's live stream had been clipped and re-uploaded before Yvette ever scrubbed in. By noon the internet knew that a man buying a hospital had streamed himself mocking its founder while his target company's guards manhandled her. And by evening the pension fund, whose money Trent was using to buy the network, had seen the video, and by the end of the week the deal was dead, and so, quietly, was Trent Bellamy's fund. He had wanted a story about the healthcare grift. He had gotten one. It just had his own face in it. The hospital's board convened. They did not fire Wade Rutherford, and the reason they didn't is worth saying, because it was Yvette who asked them not to, not because he deserved to keep his job. Because, she told them, a man who has been shown that much of himself in a single morning, and whose child's life has been handed back to him by the very person he wronged, is either going to become the worst version of himself or the best one, and firing him guaranteed the worst. So Wade stayed, on probation, and he was put through the bias and de-escalation training the Institute ran. and something in him that had been clenched for 41 years came unclenched. Within 2 years, he was the one running the orientation for new security staff, and he opened every session the same way. He told them about a woman in a rained-on coat, and he told them what he'd said to her, and he told them how close he had come, that morning, to being the reason his own son died in the building he was paid to protect. Grown men did not speak for a while after Wade Rutherford's orientation. Cole Bennett went back to school. He'd been a security guard because it paid and because he hadn't believed college was for people like him. And after that morning, he decided that the difference between the man who read the badge and the man who kicked it was a difference he wanted to be on the right side of for the rest of his life. He's a second-year nursing student now. He keeps that old laminated badge in his textbook as a bookmark. Ruth Delacroix wrote his recommendation letter. Priya Nair, the local health reporter who'd come that morning to cover a groundbreaking, and instead covered this, wrote a long piece about the 12 minutes on the steps and what they said about a country that decides who's worth looking at before it looks. It won a national award the following spring. She said in her acceptance that she hadn't earned it, she'd just been standing close enough to see it, which is a thing the good ones always say. And Micah Rutherford woke up on the second day and asked for his shoes. 1 year later, on a cold morning that came off the river with the same grudge, there was a small crowd on the front steps of the Callaway Cardiac Institute. But this crowd was holding coffee instead of phones, and they were watching a 9-year-old boy in a Reds cap cut a ribbon. His name was Micah, and he'd been picked to open the hospital's new pediatric cardiac wing because the funding for it had come anonymously from a foundation that did not put its founder's name on anything, and the boy did not know that the woman standing at the back of the crowd in the same knit cap was the reason he was tall enough to hold the scissors. Wade Rutherford stood beside his son with his hand on the boy's shoulder, and he was wearing a suit, and when a new security guard, someone Wade himself had trained, gently reminded an elderly woman in a shapeless coat near the doors that she was welcome to come warm up inside, and could he get her a coffee? Wade Rutherford watched it happen and had to look at the sky for a second. Yvette Callaway had scrubbed in at 6 that morning, before any of it, because there was a docket of hearts that didn't care about anniversaries. She came out to the ceremony in her scrubs with her cap still on, and Ruth Delacroix saw her at the edge of the crowd and started, out of 32 years of habit, to lift her voice. Yvette caught her eye and shook her head, small, smiling. Not today. She didn't need the floor called to order. She stood at the back, with the ordinary people, in the coat they'd once thrown her out for wearing, and she watched a boy she'd carried home cut a ribbon, and when a reporter drifted over and asked if she'd like to say a few words about how far the hospital had come in a year, she thought about it. And she said only, "There's a 9-year-old holding scissors, who should never have made it to 9. That's the whole speech." And she turned and walked back in, through the doors she'd been dragged away from, the same unhurried walk, to see about the next heart, and in the end almost nothing had changed about how she did her work, and everything had changed about the morning she did it in. If this one reached something in you, do her a favor and leave a single word in the comments below. Dignity. So we know which of you were paying attention, so we know whose faces to think about this week when we tell the next one. Share it with the person in your life who forgets. Sometimes, that kindness isn't a thing you save for people who can pay you back for it. And if you're new here, subscribe to Velvet Reckoning, because next week we're telling the story of a school janitor who ate lunch alone in the same cafeteria for 19 years, until the day the new billionaire donor walked in, took one look at him across the room, and started to cry.